Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in the program today, we'll have all the latest on the voting, which is now wrapped up in Iraq. We'll get the latest on the security surrounding these elections, described by analysts as being pivotal, in which 21 million people are eligible to take part. Plus, we'll have more analysis on the talks between President Trump and his Syrian counterpart, President Ahmed al-Sharaa. This as Syria joins the global coalition against the Islamic State group. Hello and welcome to the program. Voting has now wrapped up in Iraq, where 21 million people were eligible to cast their ballots in elections which have been described as pivotal for the country. Well, this election has been very closely watched by both Iran and the United States. Well, at the forefront of voters' minds, infrastructure, failing public services, unemployment and corruption. While security was tight, the authorities were taking no chances. And with the exception of reported isolated clashes, things appear to have gone smoothly. Well, preliminary results are expected in about 24 hours from now. Well, we're joined now by Lieutenant General Qais al-Muhammadawi, who is the head of Iraq's Supreme Committee for Election Security. He joins us from Baghdad. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Lieutenant General Muhammadawi. A pleasure to have you on the program. Polls opened there in Iraq at 7 a.m. local time. I just wanted to ask you, first of all, how has the voting process been going so far? And what sorts of numbers have we been seeing at polling stations?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your team for this excellent work. As you know, since 7 a.m. in the morning, our team and the directors of the Independent High Electoral Commission, IHEC, along with security personnel, have been on the ground, taking pride of raising the Iraqi flags high, and this is a national embodiment that has been seen across Iraq. Generally speaking, all the polling stations were just going smoothly, and we have strict rules and regulations in place to confront any kind of breaches or violations for the instructions or the regulations of the IHEC. And as you are aware, now the promotion and the media campaigns are over for any candidates or any kind of influence on the voters. There have been a couple of incidents where 60 people have been arrested across Iraq. All these are kind of just minor violations which will not have any major impact on the elections. However, but we have taken the necessary legal actions against them. Our different personnel and different units are still doing a great job, and we believe that this will be quite conducive for building Iraqi independent civil and military institutions that will create peace. And we have to be worthy of the trust that has been placed upon us, and we'll be dealing all the candidates on equal footing.
Right, so you have an enormous responsibility, sir, ensuring that these elections go smoothly. You say the reports of violence have been isolated, nothing coordinated. We saw reports of clashes in Kirkuk, which is just north of Baghdad. But as you say, isolated clashes. We have 21 million voters taking part in these elections. There are some 8,700 polling stations across Iraq. Just tell us what sort of measures are in place. What sort of things have you been doing to make sure the elections go smoothly?
As a matter of fact, those figures that you have mentioned cover those who are included in the elections. We have more than 11 million voters, and they are included in the list of voters for the special voting and the general elections, and the total number is above 11 million. We pin high expectations on our people, the professionalism of our personnel, and having security forces, and most importantly, to have a close coordination with the Independent High Electoral Commission, since there is an overlap between those institutions. But let me say something very important, that any kind of threatening to civil peace will not be tolerated. There will be zero tolerance against those practices, and our personnel have been given the instructions to monitor any attempts of sowing the seeds of sedition or attacks on candidates. We are 2 hours out before the polling stations will close, and we have made just a giant stride. We are dealing just in the spirit of the laws. In any incident that could take place, as far as Kirkuk is concerned, there was some kind of a clashes between two groups, which where there were just some shooting. However, the response was quite fast by our personnel, and we have referred those who just shot fire to prosecution. And unfortunately, we have 2 martyrs from the local police. It is important for us to state again that we have zero tolerance for anything that might impact the peaceful process of those elections, and each candidate has their own rights just to make their own propaganda. However, we will not tolerate with any situation that might create divisions or violence. We have to maintain the security situation, and also we have to be loyal to the blood and sacrifices of the Iraqi people, and we are hoping to have a united Iraq.
General Muhammadawi, in every election, there's always concern about voter fraud, not just in Iraq, but in every country in the world. I gather some new technology has been used in Iraq to try to tackle this, iris scanning in particular. I wondered what that's changed.
حقيقة كل سنة وكنا على مقرب وتواصل بعملنا بمختلف المناصب والقيادات.
We're getting closer to have this technology transfer and to make some advancement in the employment of technology, and we have learned from our previous experience. And also we have been examining also the experiences of other countries. And year by year we have been making strides that would support those elections in a way that would gain the hearts and minds of people and voters at large. Recently, we had cameras that were installed inside the polling stations, and those amount as just an official document that the IHEC might request in case of any complaints, and it could be quite helpful in terms of votes counting. On the other hand, we have 3 technical situations that have to be in alignment. First of all, the ID, the voter's ID, which has got a specific code, and also the fingerprint of the voter should be also in alignment with the details of the ID, and lastly, the voting form. This year, the IHEC has also supplemented those 3 different cases by having manual counting, so that because in case of any contradiction, then we have the memory devices that are usually transferred after the end of the elections. They are usually transferred by air or by ground to the national center and in Baghdad. As for other boxes and other forms of different administrators, they will head to warehouses in each province, and they will be regarded as an important document until we know that there were no just complaints or appeals. There is a close coordination between the Supreme Committee for Election Security and the IHEC. This year, let me tell you, we had no curfew, and this is a great achievement. We had no closure of borders, ports, airports. People are moving smoothly among different provinces, and also the Iraqi citizens are able to just go on with their daily life business as usual, and that is given to the progress in security in Iraq. And this is a message to send to the entire world about the new security situation in Iraq, thanks to our security institutions and agencies.
Okay, so it sounds like lots of precautions have been taken and that things have gone largely smoother. I just wanted to ask you why the former Prime Minister of Iraq, Haidar Abadi, is warning of his concerns with regards to vote buying and corruption in the build-up to these elections. Why does he think it's such an issue right now?
حقيقة التنافس الانتخابي مشروع.
To have this tough competition is legitimate, but it should fall within the framework of law and regulation. And candidates have to be honest and loyal in their promises during the campaign trail. The Iraqi people are pinning great hopes that their candidates will be just introducing and rolling out clear programs, and also to avoid the negative practices. We have been monitoring some incidents, and as you know, our team have been working just for the last 4 months, and also the Supreme Committee for the Election Security and the Cyber Security Committee, where we have arrested more than 30 or 40 people who have been who have been practicing those manipulations. And allow me to say through your channel that it is important to raise the awareness of the Iraqi people. This will increase the confidence of the voters in just knowing how, the process, and that they are really persuaded in their candidates away from the the religious affiliation, so that we can build Iraq on solid foundation. As for the candidates' programs and future objectives, this is a very political issue. But as far as we are concerned, as a security committee, we have to take the necessary legal action that have been applicable across Iraq, near the polling stations, and we have also intelligence units that are monitoring such cases, and we managed to spot some of those perpetrators, and they were arrested.
There are lots of younger candidates in this election this time around, and I'm wondering whether the voting feels different. Is there a different atmosphere, would you say, from the last set of elections in Iraq 4 years ago?
حقيقة تقريبا هذا سؤال سياسي مو أمني.
I think this is a kind of a political question. It's not security related. But let me tell you what I have been gathering from what the Iraqi people have been saying. All the just all the people of Iraq are demanded, whether they are just from the young people or other groups, are demanded to gain the hearts and minds of people. And we have, and you are right, we have seen just a new wave of young candidates with different visions. And therefore, we believe that any candidate who might be really supporting the legislative framework of Iraq and boost the confidence of our people in the parliament and avoid any negative practices, this will be a great achievement for Iraq, and this is what we have been looking for across all the governorates of Iraq.
These are the 6th elections to be held in Iraq since the downfall of Saddam Hussein. And the Iraqi president, President Abdul Latif Rashid, said, "We stand on the threshold of a new and crucial phase in our country's journey towards peace, stability and development." Why are these elections viewed as being so pivotal?
I believe those elections are of paramount importance since they are being held in a quite sensitive regional situation, let alone the level of competition, tough competition among the candidates. It is a real test just to win the confidence of the people, where the aspiration of the Iraqi people could be realized and achieved. Apart from that, those elections are significantly important since they have been able so far to avoid all the negative practices that we have seen in the past. So I think it represents a turning point for the legislative framework for the enactment of law, and also for showing the level of coordination between the executive government with the judiciary, and that's why we believe it is quite important. With that being said, the Iraqi people are hoping that the near future will be different from what we have seen in the past, in a way that will pave the way for building a democratic Iraq where the people will be just living in harmony and where we can lay down the foundations of democracy, and also for the expectations and aspirations of the Iraqi people.
Okay. Well, you've been very generous with your time. We have to end now, but thank you very much indeed. Lieutenant General Qais al-Muhammadawi, thank you very much indeed for speaking to Al-Arabiya English.
شكرا جزيلا لقناتكم. شكرا.
Now, turning our attention to Gaza, where a ceasefire deal has been in effect for 1 month now. Well, on Monday, President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who helped broker the ceasefire, met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. This is part of the US push to stabilize the truce and lay the groundwork for its next phase. Meanwhile, in Gaza itself, the UN Children's Agency UNICEF says that Israel continues to deny the entry of essential items, including syringes, which will be used to vaccinate children. This as they carry out a massive children's vaccination campaign. Well, we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Syed Ghoneim, who is the chairman of the Institute of Global Security and Defence Affairs and also a visiting professor at the Royal Military Academy in Brussels. Dr. Ghoneim, thank you very much indeed for coming to see us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
According to some reports we're reading, efforts to advance President Trump's peace plan in Gaza are facing some serious challenges right now. Some are saying the plans are faltering. The State Department, however, is saying that tremendous progress is being made in advancing that plan. What's your reading of where we are right now?
Okay, as you are aware that this plan is divided into several phases, and the first phase should be done by giving all hostages dead or alive, and alive are finished, dead are almost to be finished very soon, and at the same time to release some prisoners from Palestinian as well, and there are some, discussions about the names, especially Barghouti and so on. So it's the first phase. Second phase is really important. And remember, the first phase was related to the withdrawal of the Israeli forces inside Gaza, not outside Gaza. So that we have three lines. We have the blue one, yellow one, which we are right now, and then the red one, which I don't think we will reach that easily. So that's why I think the second phase, which is implementing with stability force, will be very difficult. And right now, it's facing some challenges. You know that we are waiting for the final resolution by the United Nations. It will be composed of which countries? Remember that United Arab Emirates declared somehow that they are not that ready or not to participate with forces, even though they were interested, or at least very, very potentially are interested to do that, or we expected that they will be members of this force. So this force composing it, and as you are aware, it's an international force composed of Islamic and Arab states, must be accepted by both, which I mean here Hamas and Israel. And the time Israel does not look at Hamas as counterpart. And this is one of the main challenges. That's why you don't find ceasefire anytime. And also, we will not find this kind of agreement. And that's why, just before we start, when I told you the difference between peace enforcement and peacekeeping in this case, because they want that all the mission to be implemented on Hamas only.
Okay. What is the difference actually between peace enforcement and peacekeeping?
Okay. So peace enforcement is more British, by the way, and it's related to chapter number 7 in the United Nations. Like, for example, when I was Chief of Staff United Nations Mission in Nepal, it was peacekeeping or peace support, which is very close to peacekeeping. It is to maintain peace between the two parties. And remember here, it's maintaining peace with peaceful procedures, monitoring, observing, and following up until, which was both of them post-conflict. But peace enforcement, usually it's between conflict and post-conflict phase. So, but peacekeeping always, or let me say, is in post-conflict phase. At the same time, peacekeeping is between two parties together, like in everywhere. But peace enforcement in this case here is another different. Peace enforcement usually to be implemented on both parties, even by force, whoever does not submit or is not submitted to the resolution of the United Nations to stop fire. But in this case, only one part, which is the Palestinian, Hamas, will be the one who submitted for that. And remember, it's not only by force, but before that, by procedures. Like, for example, disarming. And remember, disarming in Lebanon, right? So disarming in Lebanon should be in peaceful way, without intervention of any forces. Only we have UNIFIL right now, and then they should observe that within peacekeeping, not peace enforcement. But if it not succeeds before end of this year, so maybe Israel will go by force. The difference here when you come with Gaza, that the peace enforcement will use its force when it's needed if Hamas is not submitted to the procedures to disarm itself, or if any harassment happened by their side or violation in this case. And that's why in this case we will find the peace enforcement will be the responsible in front of United States, in front of Israel, in front of the international community to maintain the peace or to restore it or to keep it or even to create it inside this region, not Israel.
Okay. I mean, some people are talking at the moment about a partition of Gaza between an area controlled by Israel and another one ruled by Hamas. I think that's a sort of a temporary measure, a temporary vision. What would that mean, and what would it mean for Palestinian statehood aspirations if there were to be a partition of Gaza?
I was always asked about something technical. What's the difference between military and security? So if you see the military operation started by Israeli late October 2023, the partition was from north to south. I mean, the plan was to divide Gaza from north to south, like 3 parts, 2 parts, whatever, but north to south. But here, security partition, not military partition or security plan, was to divide Palestine, or Gaza, I'm sorry, from, west to east. Look at the difference now. So, and what's the difference here? That when I divide it operationally, as I told you, it does not secure outside Gaza. When I divide it operationally or militarily from north to south. So still, whatever they are in the north, they are in the middle, they are in the south, so they can harm outside Gaza any settlements, because they are bordering, you know. But in this case, when you have the yellow line, do you remember? We have blue line, yellow line, and red line. So we think that maybe yellow line, we have three scenarios, okay? First scenario, which is not most likely, most needed one, which is a very ideal one, that's to withdraw until blue line and then withdraw outside Gaza. Do you remember in the beginning I told you it's not that possible that they will withdraw from all lines recently. So we believe maybe they will divide Gaza security-wise from west to east using the separator of yellow line to be Palestinians east of yellow line, to have Israeli, east of the yellow line, bordering the settlements outside Gaza, and Palestinians, whoever, Hamas, not Hamas, to be north. But some Palestinians who are pro-Israeli or very, very peaceful, can say that they are trusted by Israeli, can be living in the eastern side, you know, from the yellow one. Third scenario, that maybe yellow line will not be the separator, maybe blue line. I mean that Israeli will continue moving gradually until they reach the blue line, and then they put only Hamas at the coast, and any other Palestinian maybe can harm outside Gaza to any Israeli, and then to make sure they are between the sea and between our forces in this area. And the last point I would like to tell you here, look at the reconstructions. That's why there was some dispute inside the government by some ministers when they said what? They said, if you would like to make reconstructions, don't do it in the eastern side, close to the settlements, because all Palestinians will be keen to come and live here, and then the danger will continue against us. That's why, if you want to start reconstructions, do it west of, close to the sea, I mean seashore, make the reconstruction to absorb all Palestinians to live there, and this one guides us to think about the blue line maybe will be the main separator, not only the yellow line.
I mean, huge reconstruction is needed, about $70 billion US dollars. Exactly. But I mean, it seems like a very long way off, doesn't it, reconstruction? Isn't it a bit early to be thinking about reconstruction when there was only airstrikes carried out on Gaza a couple of weeks ago?
The airstrikes or whatever, any kind of fire by Israel is for some reason, which I told you one of the many challenges, that suppose that any country is fighting the other and then the UN resolutions to ceasefire, both countries should respect, right? But in case of non-state actor, which is prescribed as terrorist, so as Israel, I would like to show always I'm not in front of counterpart. And every country around me, including Egypt, for example, is the main sponsor right now, should, comply to this, as they are not my counterpart. And that's why I use the fire just to prove to anybody. Using fire is what? Just, if you read, and you always read any kind of news about Israeli use of fire, they end with some statement. Remember me when you see it? They said what? Because after we discovered that there will be source of threat to our Israeli forces, you have to finish with this sentence. Why? Because this is something like a direct reason why we strike them, but also there is some indirect reason to show in the back mind to all over, everywhere inside this region or outside, that we are not counterpart to Hamas, we are not counterpart to Hezbollah, and we will use our fire whenever it's needed.
Okay. Obviously, the disarmament of Hamas is a massive challenge, isn't it? And I just wondered, looking at how Hamas has been reasserting itself in recent weeks, whether we're seeing any signs of progress, or is that mission impossible, do you think?
I'm sorry, if I get you, you mean concerning the mission, concerning the stability force itself?
Getting Hamas to disarm is one of the priorities of this ceasefire plan.
It must be clear in what? That I surrender. I stopped my activities, and I have to show that I don't have anything more to cost you much to pay with lives, with money, with time, with whatever, just to defeat me. But now we reach the point of what? It's something like defeating Hamas, but not decisive defeating. So they would like to make it decisive defeating by declaring disarming Hamas, I mean. That's why I don't think Hamas lost their will. And they are between 2 points. Between that, I still have some will. We try to convince Hamas now, to convince some countries, maybe Egypt, maybe others, to support my existence. Because sustainability, survival, of Hamas is something, it's not victory, but it's not also defeat. So keeping this by making disarming not that easy for you. And that's why one of the challenges in this phase, or the coming, within this phase and the others, that Hamas will not accept disarming, and maybe some violence will happen, or at least by mistakes. And remember, Hamas is not regular army, and controlling elements is not as everybody expects. Sometimes maybe you'll find some individual actions by any element of Hamas not to give you, and then you think it's like regular armed forces, and they did not respect that, and then war will be launched again. But it will be something like killing off Palestinian and Hamas again, and increase or getting back to what's going on right now.
Okay, I mean, clearly there's a lot of momentum. There's a huge push by the United States to make this work. Do you think that momentum is going to have the desired effect? Do you think something's different this time from previous efforts to bring about peace in Gaza, peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians? Do you think President Trump and his plan and all the international momentum that's there is going to somehow deliver something that's never been delivered before?
Here is some problem. What is it? That there is some impression, let me tell you, at such levels in this region, that this stability force is for sake of Israel. It's not like any peacekeeping force or even peace enforcement force. Peace enforcement force, by the way, it was used in Serbia, Kosovo, if you remember. So, but it was international resolutions, really, and, it was against who was killing the civilians, if you remember this. But now it shows to us as something like between Trump and Netanyahu, and as I told you, it's not between two countries, it's not between two counterparts, and that's why it serves more what Israeli wants. And look, how, for example, where they will be stationed. They will be in Egypt. Egypt is not part of that, right? If they would like, I mean, this is stability force, So that's why, it should be in Israel, because you are one of the parties. But as I told you, they don't consider them as counterpart to them. So that's why I don't think this progress of plan of Trump is complete as UN resolution, or as least non-UN mission, but UN resolution. It's only, by the way, who will fund this mission? Who will fund the reconstructions? And that's why maybe more countries will withdraw from this sooner or later, because it's not successful. I don't say it's not successful, but I say it's not logic to be implemented easily and softly.
Okay. Moving just to our attention to the other side of Israel's border, to Lebanon. Obviously, US patience with the Lebanese government seems to be wearing thin. They've been demanding that Hezbollah disarm as well, and Hezbollah somehow be done away with. Why is it taking so long? And is this something that the Lebanese government can realistically achieve?
Case in Lebanon should be better. Why? Several partners from outside even are participating, like France, USA, UNIFIL itself. But as you see, UNIFIL is one of the most successful missions in this region or outside as well, as I told you, because it could keep the peace for 10 years until now. But the problem here, when UNIFIL, this is the last news, if you read it, that they are diminishing according to the budget or whatever decision of the United Nations, and I can understand that. But at the same time, what you will do, if UN is out, I remember in the beginning of this war, against Lebanon, ground forces, you remember September last year, I remember also, our expectations that the only, or assessment that the only obstacle against Israeli forces not to make a huge or total war, let me say, against Hezbollah inside, was UNIFIL. because you don't want to take them. And remember, some accident happens, and one from Indonesia has been killed, one of the soldiers, United Nations soldiers. So I want to say here that UNIFIL really is stabilizing the situation. So if UNIFIL leaves, it will come with the end of this year, which is a deadline that Hezbollah must be disarmed. Hezbollah will never accept disarming. And remember, $1 billion has been paid, according to the news, from Iran to Hezbollah to reinforce themselves. Still that we believe, yes, they have, I think, according to our statistics, they have 45 and up to 60,000 still weapons, let me say missiles. Mostly are tactically, as I told you, this close range or short range. Strategic, they have only hundreds, which is not that big, but remember, when hundreds from Iran in June launched against Israel, it was disaster to Israel. So when they come together from Israel, from Houthis, and also from Iran, what will happen with Israel? So that's why Israel, I think, they paid the invoice earlier, ready to use their own forces against Hezbollah, because you know very well that Hezbollah will never accept disarmament, and Hezbollah even would like to have the Lebanese government, the Lebanese armed forces under their flag to fight Israel. They think this way.
Okay, and just lastly, Dr. Ghoneim, we're nearly out of time. All this week, it's been very much eyes on Syria, hasn't it, with what's been happening in Washington and President al-Shara's visit there. The United States has always argued, though, well, in the last few years at any rate, that a stable Syria means a stable region. Do you think that's the right logic?
Yes, yes, for some reason. Remember, we have Iraq, we have Syria, and we are between Lebanon and Iran. So according to this, we believe that really Iran was which we call proxies. So they affect the stability of the region when you are using non-state actors in Iraq, in the heart of the Khorasan, and to the northern bridge or the western bridge in the Mediterranean, you are using Syria and Lebanon, and from the southern bridge you are using Yemen, using Houthis there, all of them non-state actors, including inside Iraq. So Syria in the middle. Syria is a passage, when it comes from Iran. Syria is the biggest country, and the main difference between Syria and Lebanon, not only geographic, not only demographic, but also sects. Not sects. In Lebanon, they are sects, like sectarian when you look at it, but in Syria is ethnic. So they have different ethnics. Like, I was surprised when Syria is so-called Arabian country, because it's Arabian country, yes, but including other ethnics, they are not Arab at all, like Kurds and so that's why it's very difficult. So if you have stability, if Syria, like any European country, let me say, like Switzerland especially, for example, they have different ethnics, as you are aware, Romanian, Italian, French, German, and so, and they are really building one country together, very successful. Suppose that Syria is like this. So something will be much different, and stability will come not only in the north with the Mediterranean Sea or the west, or also to the south, down to Red Sea. And then the 5 main objectives of United States will run very successfully. Protecting maritime routes, protecting the energy, counter-terrorism, also confronting its opponents like China and Russia, and at the same time to maintain the balance of power among the regional powers. And this will all, for sure, will maintain stability for country like Israel, very developed. They implement the same political system of United States of America, and they have their big lobbies inside the United States, and then not to merge them among the Middle East, but at least to find its position among the Arabian countries. That's why Syria is very important, I think.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Saeed Ghoneim. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, the US President Donald Trump says he's looking forward to meeting Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa again. This after their historic meeting yesterday at the White House. Well, President Trump said it had been an honor to spend time with his Syrian counterpart, and he called President al-Sharaa a strong leader. Well, this was the first time that a Syrian president has visited the White House since the country's independence from France in 1946. And there was good news for Syria during this visit to Washington, as the US Treasury Department announced that it's suspending the imposition of Caesar Act sanctions for 180 days. Well, Hagar Chemali is a former director for Syria and Lebanon at the National Security Council under President Obama. She joins us now from New York. By the looks of things, Hagar, that meeting between President al-Sharaa and President Trump was pretty successful, wasn't it?
It was successful for what the administration was trying to achieve, yes. You know, for me, I was spokesperson at the Treasury Department when we sanctioned al-Sharaa, then Mohammed al-Jolani. So it was a bit jarring to see him being welcomed at the White House. But at the same time, he's proving to say the right things, and he wants to be a pragmatic leader, and that works very well with the Trump administration. And President Trump wanted a low-key meeting where they could talk seriously and try to achieve certain goals, and they did. Syria agreed to join the counter-ISIS coalition. They agreed to include the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurds, better into the army. And Trump pledged to support Syria-Israel talks for a security agreement specifically. So it was, for sure, by all accounts, a successful meeting.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it was a low-key meeting in the sense that a lot of the talks happened behind closed doors, not a huge media presence. Do you think it's fair to say the two men get along quite well?
It certainly seems like that. You know, when they first met months ago, when President Trump visited Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince pushed him to meet with al-Sharaa, from the get-go, it seemed like a fairly good relationship. And from what I see from my work in Washington, D.C., there's just a lot of hope there for Syria. And that doesn't just come from the Trump administration, by the way. It also comes from Capitol Hill. Both leaders on both sides of the aisle have a lot of hope for Syria and for working with al-Sharaa, not so much because they trust him, but because they see an opportunity there. They see somebody who is looking to make deals in order to invite investment. And it's an opportunity for the United States to try and undermine Iran's influence across the region further, and also to strike these peace deals, which is obviously a key goal of Trump's vision for the Middle East.
Right. I mean, you've sort of answered the question, but I want to ask you anyway. I mean, why do you think it is that President Trump has decided to make Syria such a key focus?
Absolutely. Well, they certainly play a critical role for a number of reasons. The first is, as we mentioned, the Iranian influence across the region. That has been a hallmark, undermining that has been a hallmark of the Trump administration from and actually, by the way, for U.S. administrations for the past several presidents. However, President Trump is particularly interested in it now that you have this crumbling of the axis of resistance. He wants to solidify that. He wants to make sure that Iran can't rearm and refund all of its proxies in the Levant. And Syria used to be the main way it did that. It used to use Syria as a land bridge, obviously. Now, President al-Sharaa doesn't have full control over all of Syria. There are still entry points into Lebanon, for example, that are concerning, that are controlled by Hezbollah, for example. But that said, there is a lot of opportunity there. So that's on one hand. And then the other is that you have a leader that, because he is interested in Syria, because he's interested in inviting investment, massive amounts of investment that are needed into Syria, relinking Syria to the international financial banking system, and reconstructing what is planned to be something in the trillions of dollars. Al-Sharaa is showing an openness to talks with Israel, to kicking foreign fighters out of Syria, to opening a base for the United States in Damascus. A lot of security steps here that are in line with U.S. national security interests, and certainly for President Trump's goal to expand the Abraham Accords, hopefully, and lead President Trump to a Nobel Peace Prize. If that happens in Syria, Lebanon would surely be next.
Is this something you ever saw you ever imagined when you were working in government, that the United States would be building a military base close to Damascus?
No way. In fact, you know, and listen, maybe that's because for my lifetime, Syria had always been under the brutal dictatorship of Hafez al-Assad and then Bashar al-Assad. And it always felt as though there was no way out. I handled the first 2 years of the Syria crisis when I was director for Syria and Lebanon. And it felt as though this was a dictator who, well, it's certainly not how we felt at the beginning, but as time wore on, it felt like this was a dictator who would never leave, who would never fall. And it was stunning enough to see al-Sharaa and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham take over the way they did. Nobody could have expected that. But then to see him invited to the White House, to the Oval Office, that's not something the White House does regularly for any leader. They do it particularly when they see a potential partner. And that's the thing here that's just so stunning. But no, and a base in Damascus, no way. But the positive effects of that for the United States and its national security interests are infinite.
And what do you think the message is from that meeting? Those two men shaking hands, seeing President al-Sharaa playing basketball with US officials. What message do you think comes out of that, and what gets sent back to the region by way of a message?
Well, there are a couple things, but one of the most important, actually, and I focused on this because I work on Lebanon still to this day. I work very heavily on Lebanon, and is if you are a leader that's willing to work with the United States, that's willing to make the courageous and difficult decisions toward peace, against terrorism, against foreign fighters, against Iran, those are obviously interests that are in line with national security interests, then the U.S. will work with you and invite you and support you in that effort. And we will work together in that way. And one of the things I caution here, because I don't want to jump to a conclusion that President al-Sharaa is somebody that we can trust in the United States, that it's going to be an ally, a new ally, that it's going to be a lovey-dovey relationship. No, the U.S. is very realistic on who he is. That's why sanctions were only temporarily lifted. Again, they renewed the withdrawal of Caesar Act sanctions for another 6 months. That's because whatever they do with President al-Sharaa needs to be conditioned. They need to make sure that he's going to, for example, protect minorities, that he's going to hold free and fair elections, that it's not going to turn into a repressive Islamist regime, for example. But the U.S. is walking into it with its eyes wide open. And so the message to the region is, we are open for business. There are many ways we can partner if you work with us in good faith. And working toward peace is the most important piece of that.
Meanwhile, Hagar, what do you think Israel makes of all of this?
The Israelis are definitely interested in working with President al-Sharaa on a security agreement. They are very cautious, though. So they also see the opportunities there. They don't want any jihadis near their border. That's a message that they made very clear to President al-Sharaa, but also they feel very strongly about the protection of minorities, particularly the protection of the Druze. And they've made this, not only have they shown that in their own efforts when you had violence against the Druze in Sweden, but this is a message that they repeat to President al-Sharaa repeatedly, and that they ask the United States as well to use its leverage and clout over President al-Sharaa. Don't forget that the United States still has these sanctions in place for the most part, and that is leverage the United States can use to try and force President al-Sharaa into making progress on issues that are of importance, including, for example, the protection of minorities. But the Israelis are interested, for sure. They're mixed in their views in terms of how much to lean into the relationship, but overall they are open to the discussions with them because they see the opportunity there.
Right, so the sanctions have been put on hold for 180 days, the Caesar Act sanctions. There were talks between President al-Sharaa and the chief of the IMF over potential aid for Syria. I mean, he didn't go back to Syria empty-handed, did he?
No, he went to Washington hoping to push for a full withdrawal or a permanent withdrawal of Caesar Act sanctions. Caesar Act sanctions are incredibly comprehensive. They target the Syrian government and anybody that supports it. They target sectors like military, energy, reconstruction. They really effectively cut the country off of the international financial banking system. And also, by the way, they threaten anybody who does work with the Syrian government and these sectors with secondary sanctions, which isolates Syria even further. So when I worked in sanctions for a very long time, so I'm happy you asked me about this. When you do a withdrawal, when you temporarily withdraw sanctions for 6 months, the issue for that, on the Syrian side, is that those other international partners are still wary because of working with you, because they're worried, well, what if those sanctions snap back into place? Then my company or my bank or whichever it is will end up being exposed to a level of risk. And that for these companies, multinational corporations and banks, is unpalatable. So he did walk away with a couple things: the renewal of the Caesar Act sanctions, the the promise of Trump to work toward an Israel-Syria security agreement. But it's all steps meant to get to a larger place. That support to get to an Israeli-Syrian security arrangement would likely result in more sanctions being lifted. So it's all part of a process. So he did get some wins, but not the biggest package he was looking for.
Okay, and I mean, we heard President Trump saying we have to make Syria work. And there seems to be this perception in the Trump administration, and maybe it was in other administrations as well, that a stable Syria would mean a greater likelihood of a stable region. Do you buy into that? Is that correct?
Well, I think it's one piece of the puzzle. I wouldn't say that it is the heart of it all, but I do agree that if we have an opportunity for a successful Syria, it's an opportunity we shouldn't miss, that the world shouldn't miss. And we do have to be cautious and go through this process, of course, because we have to be careful. At the end of the day, al-Sharaa has the history he has. He was tied to al-Qaeda. Like I said, I was at Treasury when we sanctioned him. And I knew very well who he was when I worked on the Syria war when I was at the White House. So that kind of history doesn't disappear. But that said, if he's doing the right things, and then you can work with him, and while you work with him, place these conditions to ensure that a transition to democracy is as stable as possible, that he gets control over the country to prevent a breeding ground for terrorists. This is paramount because it's a massive land bridge between Iran to the Mediterranean. We have interests, we, the United States, have interests in Israel, obviously, in Lebanon. We have interests in undermining Iranian proxies. So Syria absolutely is an important one. Again, is it more important than Iraq, for example? I don't want to get into that, but that said, it is an important player for sure in helping the U.S. achieve its national security interests. And I do think it's a great thing to want Syria to succeed and to try and help it. Al-Sharaa has massive, massive problems. And if we can play a role in tackling them, then that would be better for its future, for sure, and for all of our futures.
And you mentioned that Iran has, essentially lost a key ally in the form of Bashar al-Assad, who controlled Syria until 11 months ago. But Russia's also lost a key ally, potentially, although President al-Sharaa has been to Moscow and met with President Putin. Do you think Washington would accept Russia as well being, re-invited to have operations, to have a presence in Syria at the same time as the United States having a military base there? What do you think that future relationship is going to look like?
That's a good question. President al-Sharaa seems very skeptical of Russia still, even though he did go visit. And he visited again because he's a pragmatic guy. And again, he has certain goals for money, investment, leadership, reconstruction, and so on. But he's wary of Russia the way he is of Hezbollah. He views both with a lot of anger because of what they unleashed against the Syrian people and his own fighting against them, essentially. And he's going to tread very carefully there. So I wouldn't foresee anyway a situation where the US and Russia are on equal footing in Syria, especially because the U.S. has so much more to offer Syria, and President al-Sharaa knows that. That's why he wants the sanctions to be lifted from the United States, because it would make all the difference. That's why he's open to working with the Israelis and opening a U.S. base in Damascus, for example. So I don't think we'd be on equal footing anyway. But when it comes to the Trump administration specifically, I don't think that they would have a huge problem with having some kind of Russian, maybe the Syrians and Russians partner in some way, because they want to put bad blood under, they want to erase the bad blood. But I don't think the U.S. is going to be comfortable from a security standpoint in having an equal alliance, if you will.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, when you look back at these 11 months, incredibly fast-moving and unexpected developments. I mean, as someone who's served and monitored the situation in Syria for many years, I mean, do you sometimes have to sort of pinch yourself when you think of where we are right now?
Yes, is the short answer, and that's for many reasons. That's not just because of Syria. It's also because of how I see Iran licking its wounds after its defense capabilities were taken down, after its nuclear facilities were struck. The U.S. and Israel own Iran's skies. That means Iran is on the defense, which means that it's going to be more cautious in its bad behavior and in its efforts to rearm and fund Hezbollah, for example, and Hamas and the Houthis. Now, it is doubling down. I don't want to be naive about this. We already know that they have not changed their foreign policy objectives. They are still trying to arm and fund its proxies across the region, but it is doing so from a much weaker standpoint. And so to have all Iran and all of its proxies on its back heels this way.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow with some more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.